Back from the August recess, a couple of bills today and later in the week, charter school programs and the reauthorization of intelligence programs for 2012. The House at 2 p.m. on C-SPAN, and now to the Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Lord God, you are holy and inhabit the praises of your people. We're thankful that those who seek you will not lack any good thing. Help us to make you our source of hope, depending on your providence and trusting your mighty arms to save us. As our lawmakers seek to serve you by making choices that honor you, purify their intentions, that they will say what they believe and will act consistently with their speech. Keep them aware of how their words and deeds affect the good fortune of the lives of those in need. O God, you are our hiding place, and in these challenging days, we're depending on you to protect this nation from trouble. You are the one who puts the songs of deliverance in our hearts. We pray in your strong name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hey, how are you? The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., September 7, 2011. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Kirsten E. Gillibrand, a senator from the State of New York, to perform the duties of the Chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Madam President.
Majority Leader.
Following leader remarks, if any, there will be an hour of morning business with the majority controlling the first half, Republicans controlling the final half. Following that morning business, Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to the America Invents Act. The Senate will recess from 12:30 until 2:15 for weekly party conferences. At 2:30, there will be 30 minutes for tributes to the late Senator Mark Hatfield of Oregon. And I would indicate if people are unable to come during that 30 minutes, I would solicit their statements so that we can put them together as we often do on these situations, so they're in that nice little booklet that people can look at a later time. I would say, Madam President, that I had the good fortune of being able to serve with Mark Hatfield, a treasure of a man. I don't know if anyone from Oregon, they've had great leaders from Oregon, but certainly he's equal to any of them. A man of great character who was not bound by party, who was bound by what he thought was best for this country. I had the good fortune to travel. He led a Codell. It was a wonderful trip, led by this great statesman, went into the Soviet Union. Mongolia, saw Great Lake Baikal to find out what the Soviets had not ruined, this great alpine glacial lake. There's only two of them in the world. One is in Nevada and California. We share that Lake Tahoe, but Lake Baikal is one thing the Soviets didn't ruin. Anyway, we met with the leaders. It was a trip I'll always remember, not only where we went, but who led that trip. So I will give a more complete statement at a later time regarding Mark Hatfield, a man I had great respect and admiration. He was really a role model in my mind for what a senator should be. We expect to be in consideration of the patent bill today. I would hope that the Republicans will let us get on that. It's too bad that we had to move to proceed to it, but we did. I hope that we don't have to use the full 30 hours on that before. I hope I don't have to file cloture on it again. I hope there are a couple of amendments and we can get rid of this bill as early as tonight. We have a lot to do, Madam President. We have so much to do this work period. Highway bill, patent bill, FEMA, trade issues that we have to deal with. And we have to, those matters we need to complete before we leave here in just a few weeks. We have to take a break because of the holidays that come toward the end of this month. Madam President, I understand that H.J. Res. 66 at the desk and is due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
H.J. Res. 66, approving the renewal of import restrictions contained in the Burmese Freedom and Democracy Act of 2003.
Madam President, I would object to any further proceedings with respect to this joint resolution.
Objection is heard.
Madam President,
Placed on the corner. The bill be placed on the calendar in accordance with Rule 14.
Madam President, yesterday morning, a man walked into a pancake house in Carson City, Nevada, our capital, and proceeded to, I'm told it's an AK-47. He first shot some poor woman outside the pancake house, killed her, walked inside and started shooting with this automatic weapon. Killed 3 National Guardsmen. Killed another innocent person. And we have a number of people that are in the hospital. We hope that no more die. We're still learning the details of this tragedy, but we do know that 5 are dead. He killed himself following this rampage that he went on. National Guardsmen, as I understand, there was 5 of them there having breakfast prior to their duties. And this madman walked in and killed them. These 3 people who, one of them is a woman who, one of my outstanding employees who is a colonel in the Nevada Army National Guard. He's an airman. She was his assistant when he does his duty out there. Killed her. It's sad that this violence is around us, even in little Carson City, Nevada. Citizen soldiers sacrificing their time to defend our country are killed having pancakes at a little restaurant in Carson City. My thoughts go to the victims, and I appreciate their commitment to Nevada and this country. And what else can you say, Madam President, than your heart goes out to these people who are going through such turmoil today, trying to figure out why did this happen? It's hard to imagine such a terrible thing taking place in this quiet little town. The legislature's out of session. That's when the town picks up a little bit. But there's not much going on in Carson City. Not as you have the buzz of a Capitol when the legislature's in session. I spent 3 legislative sessions in Carson City. My kids went to school in Carson City when I was a lieutenant governor. But I do wish all the citizens of Carson City well as they begin the process of healing after these shocking events. This fall, Madam President, we're hoping, Democrats are hoping, to find Republican allies willing to reach across the aisle for the sake of creating jobs in America, for the sake of putting people back to work. For 8 months now, the Republicans have wasted our time on partisan politics. Issues that should have been so simple, like funding the government for last year. We were forced to deal with that for months. And then when we finished that, we went to do something that it happens matter of fact around here. Not that it's unimportant, but there's no reason for our country to default on the debts we have. It's extending the debt ceiling doesn't allow us to spend things on, that money doesn't go to spending on more items, more things. All it does is allow us to pay our debt. And take, for example, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan is somebody the Republicans idolize, and I have no problem with that. He was a good president and did some good things for our country, lots of good things. I liked him very much as a person and as a president. He asked us 18 different times to raise the debt ceiling, and we did it every time. Every time. But this time, no thanks. The Republicans forced us to spend months on raising the debt ceiling. And they've used unrelated amendments and procedural stall tactics to kill good pieces of legislation that have always had this support of Democrats and Republicans. Take, for example, Economic Development Administration. They blocked that. Something that has been going on for 35 years, creating jobs. This piece of legislation alone would have created 314,000 jobs. They killed it. The EDA has worked with local businesses, universities, and economically challenged areas, great jobs. I said for 3 decades, it's 4.5 decades. For nearly 2 months, they held up efforts to reauthorize the Small Business Innovation and Research Program before finally killing it altogether. This legislation would help small businesses, small technology companies, which invented everything from an electric toothbrush to how to put armor on a Bradley fighting vehicle. These small business innovation loans were terrific for bringing out the innovation and creativity of the American people, creating thousands and thousands of jobs. They forced that bill off the floor. The failure of these 2 pieces of legislation alone cost more than 500,000 jobs, more than 500,000 jobs. But not only did it take away these 2 pieces of legislation, there are many others, but these 2, but their obstructionistic tactics also cost us lots of time. For every moment wasted on procedural hurdles, and we've spent months, for these useless amendments, was a moment we weren't creating jobs. As Republicans held up the work of Congress for months in the hope of defeating the president, and this is not something I made up. My counterpart, the Republican leader, said that's his #1 issue, is making sure President Obama is not reelected. But this effort to defeat President Obama has also held up our economic recovery. We saw the total in last month's job report, which showed unemployment holding steady. It's the 8th month in a row that we've created jobs, private sector jobs. We didn't create many last month. It was about 20,000. But because of what's going on around the country with the Republicans' austerity program, there are lots of government jobs being cut. Each of us, New York, Illinois, Nevada, we've had local governments really being cut to the bone, police and fire. But these are the jobs that also people need very, very much. Madam President, I hope that they've gotten the stalling tactics out of their system and really will work with us to create jobs. Hopefully the Senate's now moving forward with this patent bill, America Invents Act. This bill will reform the nation's outdated system that has about almost 1 million patents waiting to be looked at. Any one of those patents could be a new thing, something that would create jobs and allow peoples who have such great ingenuity in America to put their product online. We're told that this reform of our nation's outdated patent system will allow us to create almost 300,000 jobs, and it will clear a 3-year backlog of patent applications. So inventors, as I've indicated, they might be able to elect the next iPod or iPad or electric car or whatever other interesting thing that makes America so great. I hope the spirit of bipartisanship comes to being now, because Congress in this country cannot afford to waste any more time. There are 2 things we can do right away to create lots of jobs. First, extend the authorization of the FAA bill. Madam President, let me explain what this is all about. We passed an FAA bill here, a good bill, passed overwhelmingly, Democrats and Republicans. It went to the House, and they put it in some dark hole over there, and finally they gave us a bill back. It's different than our bill, and here's how it's different. The National Mediation Board set a new rule. It's something called democracy. What it means is that in a labor election, majority wins. Under Republican dominance in years past, if you had a group of people who were trying to be unionized, and let's say there were 1,000 of them, and that's how many were in the work unit, and there was an election held, and 600 people turned out for that election. 450 voted, yes, we think we should be able to collectively bargain with our employer. Under the old rules, that's not enough. 450 out of 600 is not enough. You would have to get a majority of the people in the unit. And I asked my friend from New York, the presiding officer, and my friend from Illinois, because I've asked myself, under what rules, under rules like that, none of us would have been elected. Of the millions and millions of people in New York and Illinois and the 3 million people in Nevada, I won by 5% last election. I got a majority of the people that were registered to vote. That's how you win in America. Not a majority of everyone in the state, because no one would be elected if that in fact were the case. But that's how the Republicans, they want to change the rules. They want to go back and say that it's simple majority of those voting is not enough. You have to have a majority of everybody in the union. And as I indicate, based on our elections, it would mean that each of us would have to get a majority of everyone in the state. So they stuck that provision in the bill saying, no, majority is not enough. You have to have a majority of everyone in the unit. It's kind of an anti-democratic issue that they placed in this legislation. I would hope they would take that out. They haven't been willing to do that. If we can reform our antiquated air traffic control system, it'll bring us into the modern world, where we're no longer depending on Second World War technology, that is radar, and we can move into the modern world like most all countries have, where we have GPS. It'll create lots and lots of jobs, Madam President, hundreds of thousands of jobs, which are so badly needed. Ray LaHood, Secretary of Transportation, thinks this is essential that we get this done for the safety and security of our nation, and certainly create lots and lots of jobs. Second, we must authorize federal spending for the nation's highways. About 1.8 million construction jobs in highway and mass transit projects nationwide are at stake. If we don't extend this bill, they'll be gone. Almost 2 million jobs. So we'll be happy to consider any bipartisan idea to get the economy humming again. I've talked about 2 things. Here are 2 ideas that Republicans have supported in the past. Payroll tax cuts and an extension of unemployment insurance. Extending the payroll tax cut could save 972,000 American jobs next year alone. Extending unemployment insurance during these tough economic times would save 528,000 American jobs. They've agreed to these in the past. Speaker Boehner and Leader Cantor wrote to the President yesterday, and they said, quote, "Our differences should not preclude us from taking action on areas where there is common ground." End of quote. I hope that they would agree that extending unemployment benefits and cutting the payroll tax are agreements that are common sense. So I agree with them. Our differences should not preclude us from taking action in areas where there's common agreement. Let's start with the 4 common sense measures that I've talked about. FAA bill, We, of course, have to do the extension of the payroll tax cuts, do the unemployment insurance, and, of course, FAA. So, Madam President, I would hope that we can move one of these as quickly as possible.
Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for 1 hour, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the second half.
Madam President.
Senator from Illinois.
Madam President, under morning business, I ask unanimous consent to speak for 10 minutes.
Without objection.
And I see the senator from New Hampshire is here and ask that she be permitted to speak immediately after I'm concluded. Madam President, tomorrow night we'll hear a speech from the President of the United States about an issue that affects every single one of us in America. It affects millions in a personal way and all of us indirectly. It's the state of our economy. It's an economy that has been racked by a recession which has gone on way too long. Even the President concedes that we had hoped that we would have emerged at this point, but we still have not. I think it is important for us to focus on the reality of life, even for working families in America. Too many working families today are struggling to survive paycheck to paycheck. Over the last 10 or 20 years, we have seen a decline in the rate of growth in real wages, which means that families, even working families, aren't earning enough to keep up with the cost of living. They're falling a little bit behind each year. They recently surveyed working families across America and asked them a basic question. They said, if you had an emergency in your family and needed to come up with $2,000 in the next 30 days, could you find that $2,000 either in your savings or borrow it? 47% of working families said they could not come up with $2,000 in 30 days. $2,000 is the cost of an uneventful trip to an emergency room. It's an indication of the vulnerability of families all across America. I'm also concerned about the fact that as you speak about the economy, we know that many families are doing the right thing, trying to shed debt. We see the credit card debt in America declining as fewer and fewer people borrow against their credit cards, understanding the interest rates they're going to pay are way too high, and it's impossible to keep up with your debt if you pile it all on credit cards. People are reluctant to purchase because they're afraid of debt and vulnerable with the thought of losing their jobs or perhaps seeing a decline in their wages. That's the reality of life for working families across America. It's a reality that I've seen in Illinois and a reality that really affects us nationwide. The President will address that tomorrow night, as he should. I think there are ways to deal with it, but here is the caution I would like to add. We are fixed on the theme of our nation's deficit and debt, and we should be, because as we borrow 40 cents for every dollar we spend, we create an unsustainable situation for future generations. That's a fact. I've been party to the Bowles-Simpson Commission, where I voted for their report. I've worked with the Gang of Six, some bipartisan effort in the Senate, which has more than 30 senators showing an interest in this approach. So I really seriously believe that this deficit and debt are a problem for us in the long term. But I might remind my colleagues on both sides of the aisle that Bowles-Simpson, this bipartisan presidential commission, concluded that we should not hit the brakes on spending, should not hit the brakes on government activity too soon because of the recession. In fact, they recommended that we wait another year with a serious effort to reduce the deficit coming after the recession. The logic behind it is obvious. It is virtually impossible to balance the budget of the United States with 14 million people out of work. You need to put Americans back to work, earning a good paycheck, paying their taxes, and then you can start building this economy and building toward a balanced budget. I hope that we keep that in mind as we talk about what we're facing, as we try to create a climate to create more jobs in America. It is interesting to me the President will propose to extend the payroll tax cut for working families across America. It accounts for 2% of income. That, to me, is sensible. Put spending power in the hands of working families, lower and middle-income families. These are the people who are struggling paycheck to paycheck. We've done that. We should continue to do that. The criticism from the Republican side of the aisle is, no, you shouldn't allow a tax cut for middle-income families and those in lower-income categories unless you pay for it. Interestingly enough, that's exactly the opposite position from what they took when they were talking about tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. When the Republicans wanted to see tax cuts for those making over $250,000 a year, they say we don't have to pay for them. But when we talk about tax cuts for working families, middle-income families, all of a sudden they become deficit hawks and say you have to pay for those tax cuts. I think that we should continue the 2% payroll tax cut to help working families. I think that's good. I also think we ought to extend unemployment benefits. I spent my time in August in Illinois visiting unemployment offices where I met a lot of people who are struggling every single day to apply for jobs, sometimes 4 and 5 applications a day, and many times without success. They are doing their best to pick up new skills at community colleges and training courses. They're trying to make their resumes look a little more attractive, working to do so, and they're running into a brick wall time after time. Some are in extremely desperate circumstances. Extending unemployment compensation at this moment in our economy is absolutely essential. It is the right and caring and humane thing to do, and it also injects money into the economy. The President will call for this, and I think he's right. The Republicans have said we have to pay for that unemployment compensation. Again, it is hard to follow their logic as they offer millions of dollars of tax relief for the wealthiest people, refuse to end the tax cuts and benefits for the most profitable oil companies in America, and when it comes to helping the unemployed and middle income, then they become deficit hawks. They also talk about the corporate income tax. The corporate income tax rate in America is 35%, and they say it's one of the highest in the world. That's true. But it's an effective rate versus the nominal rate. The nominal rate's 35%. The effective rate is much lower. Take, for example, the report that just came out that puts this in perspective. It was a report that compared the salaries for the CEOs, the chief executive officers of major American corporations. 25 of the 100 highest-paid corporate executives in the United States earned more in pay than their company paid in taxes in the year 2010. That's right. Our tax code is so easy on massive multinational corporations, they pay their top executives more than they pay in federal taxes each year. It's a startling fact. It's a report released by the Institute for Policy Studies. If you look through the report, you'll see some of the biggest names in corporate America. Look at General Electric. They made waves when it was reported that it paid zero, absolutely nothing in federal taxes last year. In fact, GE got a refund from the government of over $3 billion. The top executive at General Electric was compensated to the tune of $15.2 million. Consider that for a moment. When we talk about the unfairness of corporate taxes, the biggest multinational corporations in America are escaping the 35% rate. Some are actually getting money back, and they're paying their executives money in reward for coming up with these tax strategies under our current tax code. You want to clean up the tax code? Stop imposing the highest corporate tax rate on middle and small businesses and impose it on the large corporations, the most profitable corporations in America. The other idea is this repatriation tax holiday. We should take care here. Before we allow major corporations to bring their profits back into the United States tax-free or at lower tax rates, which is what they're asking for, look at what happened when we tried that under the Bush administration. $362 billion in earnings repatriated under the holiday, $312 billion qualified for the tax break, but we didn't see a corresponding increase in employment of those corporations. They brought back the money they earned in profits overseas and declared it as dividends and profits and gave it in compensation and bonus to their executives. They did not create jobs. Now the Republicans are pushing for that same strategy. They want to give this tax holiday to these major corporations with no strings attached. I think we've learned our lesson under the Bush administration. If that money's coming back to America, it should be dedicated to growing the corporations in America and growing good-paying jobs right here at home. And it shouldn't go out the door in executive compensation, dividends, and profits. The tax code is unfair, but it's primarily unfair to working families. We've got to do everything we can to make it fair for them. And secondly, we've got to make sure that we eliminate some of the loopholes that are stacked in the tax code today. I've been in favor of tax reform and think it's an essential part of fairness in America, getting the economy moving forward and dealing responsibly with our deficit. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Madam President, as you know so well as the Senator from New York, across the country this weekend, Americans everywhere will gather to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the tragic events that took place on September 11, 2001. Families from every town, from every city and state will mark this day in their own solemn way and take a moment to remember and honor the nearly 3,000 victims of those senseless attacks. More than any episode in recent American history, the events of 9/11 were experienced on a very personal level all across this country. No one was untouched by the tragedy of that day. All of us can remember exactly where we were when we heard the news. We remember those frantic hours as we tried to call loved ones. We remember the silence in our skies as our nation's entire air system shut down. We remember mourning the loss of family, friends, and neighbors. And we remember the fear and uncertainty as we wondered if more attacks were coming. We remember the sight we all watched on television, again and again, the sickening sight of the falling towers of the Trade Center. It's a vision that's been forever seared into every American's mind. As governor of New Hampshire at the time, I was actually here in Washington for a National Governors Association event on early childhood education. I will never forget looking out of my hotel and seeing the smoke rising from the Pentagon. The attacks of 9/11 forever changed us as a nation. Our entire notion of security was turned upside down. Our government changed, our policies changed, and our view of the world changed. For our children and grandchildren especially, this became one of the defining events of their generation and has left an indelible mark on their worldview. As we gather this weekend, all of us in our own way will take a moment to recall those feelings of sadness and anger and to honor the memories of those we lost. But that loss is not the end of the story, and grief is not the true legacy of 9/11. We're not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond when we're faced with adversity. September 11th didn't cripple us as a nation. Instead, it brought out the best in all of us. Our story is really how we responded in the face of this attack, with courage, resolve, and unity. In the aftermath of September 11th, we showed the world the true meaning of the American spirit. The story of America's response to 9/11 starts on that very day with accounts of heroism that we could never have imagined. We remember the firefighters and the other first responders climbing up the stairwells of the burning World Trade Center while others fled down, and how they paid the ultimate sacrifice for their selflessness. We remember the courageous passengers on United Airlines Flight 93 who took away the terrorists' greatest weapon, fear, by fighting back even though it meant their lives. And who knows how many lives they saved when they stopped that attack. In the days that followed, all Americans stepped up in any way they could. Red Cross centers were overwhelmed with volunteer blood donors. Millions of us donated money and offered up prayers. In New Hampshire, days after the attack, I remember joining a crowd of hundreds for a prayer service at St. Paul's Church in Concord. We came together to honor the victims and to comfort each other. And the response was incredible. The crowd spilled out into the streets, with many waving American flags and holding candles, singing "God Bless America." In New Hampshire, our state government and our employees refused to buckle under the terrorist threat. We kept the state working on September 11th. I won't forget the more than 100 fire departments across New Hampshire who called our state fire marshal's office to offer their services for assistance in New York. or the countless physicians, rescue workers, and volunteers who made themselves available to help at a moment's notice. And of course, we can't tell America's story without telling the story of the men and women in our military who've spent the last decade trying to make sure that an attack like this never happens again. Since September 11th, more than 5 million men and women have voluntarily joined the armed forces to protect America and defend her freedom abroad. More than 6,200 Americans, including 37 troops from New Hampshire, have given the ultimate sacrifice in our nation's defense. Over 45,000 more have been wounded or injured and returned home with lasting scars. Millions of troops and their families have sustained the toughest, most debilitating tempo of deployments in our nation's history, often being deployed into war 5 or 6 times, enduring constant mental and physical strains in service to our country. The resolve our troops have demonstrated since 9/11 has yielded a string of successes on an extremely complex battlefield. Our men and women in uniform have done everything that has been asked of them. Osama bin Laden has been brought to justice. Countless other high-level terrorist operatives, including the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks, have been killed or captured, and the organization's bases in Afghanistan and Pakistan remain under constant pressure. Al-Qaeda and its extremist affiliates' deadly ideology is being questioned around the globe, and the remnants of Al-Qaeda's diminishing leadership are disorganized and struggling to reestablish themselves in the face of an aggressive U.S. offensive. As our current Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, has remarked, we are, quote, within reach of strategically defeating Al-Qaeda. Although we can't be complacent and we must remain steadfast in our pursuit, our military should be honored for their gains our nation has made against the terrorists who attacked us on September 11th. In New Hampshire, our Air National Guard deployed almost immediately after the attacks, and every day since September 11th, 2001, have been providing persistent air refueling coverage for the Homeland Defense and for our commanders in Iraq and Afghanistan. I will forever remember walking through the Manchester airport with the New Hampshire National Guard when flights resumed after 9/11. As we walked through, people everywhere stopped what they were doing to applaud the National Guard for their efforts to keep the people of New Hampshire safe. In the decades since the attacks, Americans have found new appreciation for the service these citizen soldiers provide. And Americans outside the military have learned that they have a role to play, too. With the heroes of United 93 as their inspiration, everyday Americans have stopped a number of terrorist plots from succeeding. Passengers and flight personnel stopped the December 2001 bomber, the attempt by shoe bomber Richard Reed. They stopped the Christmas Day 2009 attempt on board the Northwest Airlines flight. The attempted Times Square bombing last year, as you remember, was in part averted by an alert New York City street vendor. Perhaps most important, as we remember America's 9/11 story this weekend, we should all reflect on the unity we demonstrated in the face of this terrible attack. On September 11th, we weren't Republicans or Democrats, black or white, rich or poor. We were all Americans. The attack focused our attention on our common bonds and on the American ideals we all hold dear. We were determined to prove that despite our differences, the United States of America would persevere and endure. And while we've not always maintained that sense of unity in the years since, our memory of it has inspired us and continually reminded us of what is possible when we reach for the best within ourselves. When the history books are written and America's 9/11 story is told to the generations to follow, I hope it will tell of how we came together to remind the entire world of what this country stands for and who we are as a people. How after our darkest day, we rose up with new determination. How instead of turning inward, we chose to confront the evil that had visited our shores and to fight on. And how we continued to be the beacon of hope, liberty, and opportunity that we have always been to the world. Thank you very much, Madam President. I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I come to the floor today because this week President Obama is going to present his new jobs plan to the American people, to all of us. And I am certain that we will hear a lot of talk and a lot of promises. Now, I remember when former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi famously announced in 2010 at our White House health care summit. I sat around the table at that summit, and in the discussion, she said that the President's new health care law, she said, would create 4 million jobs. 4 million jobs. And here's exactly what former Speaker Pelosi promised on February 25th of 2010. She said, quote, "This bill is not only about the health security of America," she went on to say, "it's about jobs." She said, "In its life, it will create 4 million jobs, 400,000 jobs," she said, almost immediately. Madam President, I ask today, where are the jobs? The fact is that the President's health care law didn't create jobs. As a physician, I've come to the floor every week since the health care law has been signed and have given a doctor's second opinion about this health care law and why I believe it's bad for patients, bad for providers, the nurses and the doctors who take care of those patients, and terrible for the taxpayers. So here we are 17 months after the President signed his health care plan into law, and the American people have yet to see job growth anywhere near the figures promised by Nancy Pelosi. In fact, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported last week that the American economy generated a whopping 0 jobs during the month of August. 0. This is sobering news when we have 9.1% unemployment in America. The New York Times, September 3rd, had an editorial called The Jobs Crisis. And let me read from it. It says that the August employment report released on Friday, this is the New York Times, is saying, is bleak on all counts. Said, but at least it leaves no doubt that the United States is in the grip of a severe and worsening job crisis. Severe and worsening. It said this should lend a sense of urgency to the speech on jobs that President Obama plans to deliver this week. And of course, the speech is scheduled for tomorrow night. The New York Times goes on to say the economy added no jobs in August, 0. And the anemic numbers for June and July were revised downward. Downward, Madam President. The unemployment rate is stuck at 9.1%, and then it goes on to say it would be 16.2% if it included the swelling ranks of those who find only part-time work and the millions who have given up looking for jobs that simply do not exist. So, here we are, Madam President, looking at this sobering news, and it seems like the only connection between the health care law and the jobs market in America is that the job creators, the people that create jobs in this country, made it very clear that they can't afford the President's new health care law. Month after month, we hear from more people in the private sector who explain that they'll either have to fire people or stop providing coverage in order to comply with the significant expenses of the new health care law. Let me repeat, this law encourages job creators not to create jobs, but to fire workers, not to hire workers. Well, to get around this problem in the short term, the administration began doing something that I didn't anticipate when the health care law was signed. They began to grant waivers from the President's health care law. They said, oh, it doesn't apply to you, doesn't apply to you, come and apply for a waiver. Well, during the month of August, this past month, the administration once again granted another round of waivers from the President's health care law. Another 73 waivers allowing another 105,000 people to get out of the mandates of the Obama health care law. Since October of 2010, the Obama administration has granted over 1,500 annual benefit limit waivers. Now they're granting them for 3 years. And these waivers now cover over 3.4 million Americans, so the law and the mandates don't have to apply to them with regard to the benefits. Now, over 50% of these waivers, who have they gone to? Well, they've gone to union people who've gotten their health care through a union health plan. These are the very same people who lobbied for and supported the President's health care law. It's startling that even unions can't afford the President's law. Remember Nancy Pelosi saying, first we have to pass it before you get to find out what's in it? Well, as more and more Americans have found out what's in the health care law, they say, we don't want this to apply to us. In fact, the Service Employees International Union said that the law would be financially impossible for them to comply with. Well, I don't think any job creator or American family should have to bear financially impossible costs because of the President's health care law. Each time this administration releases yet another round of its health care law waivers, it reminds the American people how fatally flawed the President's new law is. Now, as the President prepares for his speech tomorrow night, he needs to take a hard look at his health care law. He needs to face the unfortunate reality that his law actually makes it harder and more expensive for the job creators of this country to hire more people. We need to make it easier and cheaper for the job creators of this country to create private sector jobs. But yet the President's health care law makes it harder and more expensive. Tomorrow night, the President needs to change direction. Instead of giving waivers to businesses and unions, he should announce that all Americans can get a waiver from his health care law. Now, the good news is that I have a bill that he can support immediately. My bill will allow any individual, any American citizen, to submit a waiver application seeking relief from any or all of the health care law's mandates. Waivers will be granted to individuals showing that the health care law is either increasing their health care premiums or decreasing their access to benefits. The bill is simple. It's straightforward. It's Senate Bill 1395. It's called the WAVE Act, and there are 16 co-sponsors in the Senate. Basically says if your costs go up or your benefits go down, then you have the freedom to get out of the President's health care law. Health insurance premiums have risen 19% since President Obama took office. Tomorrow night, the President should announce that he will allow all Americans an opportunity to opt out of his health care law. If he did, this would be one of the best steps that he could take to help America's economy. And that, Madam President, is why I come to the floor week after week with a doctor's second opinion about a health care law that I believe is hurting our country. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.